I want you to think about the last time you booked a pet transport. You probably checked the price. You may have checked availability. You might have asked a few questions about the process. But I am willing to bet you assumed that somewhere in the background, the airline was making sure the person carrying your animal knew what they were doing. They are not. I am Julian, Chief Pet Travel Advisor at Rockstar Pets, and today we are talking about one of the most misunderstood aspects of pet air travel: what airlines are actually responsible for when a pet boards a commercial flight, and what they are not. Because the gap between those two things is where most of the risk in this industry lives. Here is what an airline does when a pet boards a flight. They verify that the carrier meets their size and ventilation requirements. They confirm that the animal meets their weight and breed restrictions. They collect the pet fee. And then they issue a boarding pass. That is the full extent of their involvement in your pet's welfare for the duration of that journey. What they do not do is verify the credentials of the person carrying your animal. They do not check whether that person has any formal training in animal handling or distress response. They do not confirm whether that person carries insurance. They do not assess whether that person has a protocol for what happens if something goes wrong at 30,000 feet. None of that is within the airline's scope of responsibility, and none of it is something they have any regulatory obligation to verify. This is not a criticism of airlines. They are operating within their defined role. The problem is that most buyers assume that role is larger than it is. They see a boarding pass and they interpret it as a form of vetting. It is not. It is a ticket, nothing more. The pet transport industry in the United States operates with almost no federal regulatory oversight specific to in-cabin animal welfare. There is no licensing body that certifies pet transporters. There is no government agency that audits the qualifications of the person sitting next to your puppy on a commercial flight. There is no minimum standard of training required to call yourself a flight nanny or a pet transport specialist or anything else. Those titles mean exactly what the person using them decides they mean. What this creates is an industry where the difference between a professional pet logistics company and someone doing this as a side hustle is entirely invisible to the buyer at the point of booking. They look the same on the surface. They both have a website. They both have reviews. They both get your pet on a plane. The difference only becomes visible when something goes wrong, and by then, you are at altitude with no options. So if the airline is not regulating this and the government is not regulating this, what protects your pet? The answer is the standards that a professional company builds for itself, the training it requires of its pet attendants, the insurance it carries, the protocols it has developed for scenarios that most companies have never thought through, the confirmation policy that ensures your animal is never on a standby seat waiting to be denied boarding at a gate. Those standards are not legally required, they are chosen, and the companies that choose them do so because they understand that in the absence of regulation, the only thing standing between your pet and a preventable disaster is the integrity of the people you trust with that animal. At Rockstar Pets, we chose those standards before we ever put a pet attendant on a flight, not because we had to, because the alternative was unacceptable. The next time you book a pet transport, do not assume the airline has done the vetting for you. They have not. Ask the company directly. What training do your pet attendants have? What insurance do you carry? What happens if something goes wrong mid-flight? A professional operation answers all three without hesitation. If they cannot, the airline's boarding pass is the only credential they have. And that is not enough. I am Julian. Subscribe for more on what the pet logistics industry does not want you to know.